This is Danny from the Agonist, and you're watching RichardMetalFan.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Richard Metal Fan Interviews. This is episode number 111, and today's guest we're talking to Danny Marino. Danny Marino is the guitarist for the band The Agonist, kind of a melodic death metal band from Montreal, Canada. Today we're going to be talking to him about what got him into metal, what made him want to play guitar, as well as the history of The Agonist. So without further ado, let's go talk to Danny. So what's up, guys? I am here with Danny Marino from The Agonist. How are you doing today, Danny?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
It's so awesome to have you here. So, kind of the format is I want to do like a rundown of the Agonist catalog as well as your journey as an artist from where you started to now. But before we go into that, and I always ask everybody that I interview, what were the first bands that got you into metal? What made you want to start playing guitar?
Um, I think what made me want to start playing guitar actually had nothing to do with metal. When I was like an early teenager, I was more influenced by like hard rock music and like 60s, 70s, 80s rock and stuff like that. And that's what got me started, kind of thing. So that's like Zeppelin, Hendrix, uh, the Beatles, Doors, and then the 80s stuff was more like Aerosmith, kind of all in that rock vein. And I think my trajectory went to from there to Guns N' Roses, which is like a natural rock trajectory, and then of course into Metallica and so on. So I think I followed a pretty obvious, I guess, you know, Metallica being my entry point to metal.
Yeah.
Um, my brother had a cassette tape of the Black Album, so I might be dating myself a bit there. So yeah, I played that cassette tape in my Walkman on repeat, and that kind of started that journey. But even then, I wasn't super serious about it. It was just kind of like it's fun to play in my bedroom, and I like listening to it. It wasn't like a deep passion when I was 13 years old, you know? And I just started doing more and more of that. Like, I love playing guitar and figuring out songs by ear, listening to them and figuring out how to play them or jam along to them. And I kind of graduated into more of like a progressive area, which was like Tool, Incubus, Perfect Circle, all that area, kind of prog rock, prog bordering on prog metal. Yeah. And then kind of like that new American wave of heavy metal hit with Killswitch and Lamb of God and God Forbid and Shadows Fall and all this Chimera. And that was kind of my introduction to what would be like more heavy, the heavier side, right? And then
Yeah.
I just kept building out from there, getting more extreme, more heavy, and more into what would be true metal, you would call it, or whatnot, from and you can kind of hear that, I think, in our records, the trajectory
Yeah.
coming from a place that's more like the bands I just mentioned in the
Yeah.
first record, and then it kind of progresses into more symphonic, Black Death, etc., and all these areas.
All right. And tell, were you in any bands before you started up the Agonist, or was the Agonist your first band?
My first real band, yeah, there was like groups of guys I would jam with, and we never really even played a show. It was like just trying to get something together, getting a couple songs written, putting it together and jamming. Never really went anywhere. And it's just that, technically it wasn't the Agonist. The first band was like, it was me and Chris are the only members who are still in the Agonist now. So we had a different drummer. I was the only guitarist, and we had a male singer before Elisa. And it wasn't called the Agonist or even Tempests because we were Solace in that band. And then once we got Elisa, we said we should change the name, and we became Tempest from there. And then after that, the Agonist became when we became more of a real band that was going to release a record and tour and everything. We had the name changed.
All right. And tell me about the first album, Once Only Imagined. What was that like? Because, of course, you then got signed to your first label, Century Media. How did Century Media find the Agonist?
Yeah, it was honestly, I to this day, I'm pretty thankful. It was a lot of luck, honestly. I mean, they liked the material, so that's good. But what happened was there's a local producer here in Montreal who Christian Donaldson,
From
who
Cryptopsy.
from Cryptopsy, who at the time was nobody really. He wasn't in Cryptopsy and he wasn't producing any bands that were known at all because he was just really getting his feet wet, just really starting at that time. So he was just doing local bands in Montreal, and we heard, hey, this guy's pretty good. I heard he does decent stuff. Okay, let's record with him. And we didn't have much options either, and it was one of the best decisions we ever made. But we went and was recorded what was supposed to be an EP. It was going to be a 5-song EP. It wasn't even a full album. It was like kind of
Oh,
like,
wow.
hey, let's record some songs and then we can show them maybe to people and labels, and maybe they'll sign us to do an actual album. And so we were recording that. It wasn't even done yet. It was like halfway done. And he tells us, hey guys, listen, something happened. He's like, so Cryptopsy needs a guitarist, and they came to me and they asked if I would audition. And so I'm going to do it. But if I get it, then I have to go on tour immediately. And like, I can't finish your record till I'm back. And we're just like, well, hey, that's, sucks for us, but you gotta do it. You gotta go for your opportunity, man. Like, go do it. And he got in, and he did it, and he immediately went and toured with them. And the thing was, he had our demo with him. He took it with him on the tour to listen to like get mixing notes and think about, what he has to fix. And he was literally like playing it or listening to it. And the A&R from Century Media was there because he came to see Cryptopsy. And he's like, what are you listening to? And he said, it's this band I'm producing in Montreal. They're pretty cool. You want to hear it? And he did. And he's like, that's great. I love it. He's like, you should send me that when it's mixed. Yeah. And so it became that. The 5 songs that were on the disc there are still on that album, but we actually retracked and remixed them to like try to make them as good as they possibly could be after that happened.
Wow. Yeah, which songs were they?
Rise and Fall,
All right.
the first song, I think it is.
Yeah, that's the second song. I think there's that intro
Yeah,
synopsis that goes into Rise and Fall, which is a great transition, by the way.
thanks. And it was Rise and Fall, Forget Tomorrow, I think Trophy Kill, all the oldest songs for us. So it was like
Yeah.
Void of Sympathy, and I think one other, maybe Memento Mori or something, one of them. And the thing is, so then once that happened, the story is actually funny, is that because he's in Europe, he's on tour in Europe when this happens, and so I'm just getting up in the early morning in my parents' house because I'm like 20 at this point, and I'm like in my underwear and a t-shirt, and I go on the computer to check my MSN Messenger because it's back then, and I see a message from him. He's like, "Hey, dude, I'm here with the Century Media rep. He really likes your stuff." Just like that. I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Like, what do you mean? And he's just like, "Yeah." And he told me that what happened. He's like, "So yeah, so anyways," because Chris is like super relaxed like that all the time. He's like, "Yeah, yeah. So anyways, we should really record this stuff and make it really good because I think they want to sign you." And I'm like, you're fucking kidding me right now. You're not, this is not real. And he's like, yeah, man, it's real. So once we heard that, we were like, okay, we got to go all in. And also we're going to be on Century Media, and all this. It's like, I think we need a little bit more metal, like in our music, a little harder. What's the darker, harder, or side that we can do to add to these 5 songs? So the songs that we added were more of the heavier songs on the record. So like Business Suits and Combat Boots and
Yeah.
I'm like drawing a blank now. I don't even so long ago. Born Dead, Buried Alive. So yeah, these tracks were added after the fact in our efforts to, we really want to show what we can do, and they turned out, I think, to be like the most popular tracks. So that worked out.
Yeah, and Business Suits for Combat Boots is definitely still one of my favorite Agonist songs. And this album is definitely follows with like the melodic death metal. With I mean, all your stuff is kind of like I consider mellow death, but with like your first couple albums, they also have a little hints of like metalcore influence. I don't know how
Oh
you
yeah.
kind of feel
Oh,
like not to pigeonhole.
nah, it's what it is. I can't deny that first record definitely has metalcore influences. When I wrote those songs and we recorded it, we were listening to God Forbid and Killswitch Engage and Shadows Fall and Lamb of God. All these bands were in our, you know, burn CD mixes and whatever in our car, whatever. So it's very makes total sense. And also we had a different drummer then too, even
Yeah.
though technically Simon is like in the photo for the record,
Yeah,
but
he's
he
like
did
right
not
in the
play.
back right here.
Yeah, Simon did not play drums
Yeah,
on that album.
it was actually Derek Nadon.
Yeah, and Simon added a lot of the metal uh, to the band, a lot of the heavier death metal influence stuff, because not only his drumming style was super different from Derek like that, but he actually brought in ideas too, because he's like from 12, 13 years old, he's listening to like Cannibal Corpse and Dimmu Borgir and shit. So he came into our band, we were just starting to get into that kind of stuff when he joined. So he brought a lot of that element in, and then I learned from that, and we, started going in a darker route after. And as well, after we released Once Only Imagined, we went on tour with a bunch of other bands, and they paired us up with all these like super heavy extreme bands, which was not the greatest fit for us, but we wanted to tour. But we got a lot of inspiration from watching those bands play every night.
Yeah. And kind of moving on to the next album, Lullabies for the Dormant Mind. Usually with the debut album, you have like your entire life to write, and there's a lot of like hype with the first album. When it came to Lullabies for the Dormant Mind, did you felt like pressure to follow up Once Only Imagined?
I guess yes, but at the same time, I think we were so young that we didn't, I don't know, we weren't thinking about that stuff. I feel like I think about it now. Now when I'm putting out a new record, I think about these things, you know, about sort of the idea of topping the last one, and how's it going to be received, and like, all this kind of stuff that's like almost a businessy idea. And then it was literally just like, I like these riffs. These riffs are cool. You know what I mean? And then Elisa's like, this vocal melody is really interesting. And I put like 17 layers of harmonies and all this, and it's super cool. And we're just like, cool. Like, so it was like kind of nice that it was like free of those more adult ideas of worrying about, the product, the end product, and what it's going to mean and what it's going to do. But yeah, so there wasn't really a concern for that. But at the same time, you could say that that's a bit of a hindrance, because a lot of people love that record, and myself included. But the criticism of it might be that it's like, it's super cool, but it's a little all over the place. It's
Yeah.
like, I don't know where I'm going because it's so many different things all at once, you know? And so maybe that's a little bit a result of what I was talking about, where we're just doing without thinking, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like great songs like here, like the Tempted, this like Thank You Pain, like all this album, like every song pretty much is a banger in my opinion.
It was also a big change for we challenged ourselves a lot with that because the musicianship leveled up huge from the first record to the second record.
Yeah.
So it required uh, a lot more control of what you're doing.
Yeah, and it was also the first album with Simon on drums. Did he bring in something like new rhythmically to the Agonist that you all didn't have previously?
Yeah, totally. Um, you know, a real full-on metal style of drumming that is influenced by extreme metal drummers. It's like Gene Hoglan and Hellhammer and all these guys and Thomas Hawk and all this kind of drumming is where he came from, what his influences are and all this, and Dave Lombardo and so before our drums were a lot more like simple, slower, groovy, and like to the point, just like more square. And yeah, so Simon brought intensity and speed and super fast double bass and blast beats and all this kind of stuff that we didn't have before.
Yeah. And kind of moving on to the next album, Prisoners. I love this album. This is pretty much, in my opinion, my favorite album from the Agonist. What was that like going from this to this? I mean, I don't really know how to describe it.
That was, I think, what happened was the progression of, like, if I was to use like bands, because I don't know how else to explain it, but like, let's say the first record I named off those metalcore bands that were kind of influencing us. And then the second record, it was like Dimmu Borgir, The Faceless, The Haunted. So like some Swedish death influence with some modern deathcore and like symphonic death metal, and all this came in. And then Prisoners, we started going into more of a progressive direction. And, it was like Opeth and stuff like that, and Death, and even some rock bands and stuff, like incorporating a rock vibe in the midst of this progressive metal. Um, yeah. So I think that was a kind of a big part of it, was just a general progressive influence across the band that made us open up to trying to incorporate different things into the music.
Right. All right, and I still love this album. Like Panophobia's, yeah,
Yeah.
like Ideo Motor, which it's just I think it's like the longest song on here. It's like 8 minutes. I almost consider it kind of like your Master of Puppets in a way.
Yeah, that's also the album that Paco joined the band.
How
So
did he join?
before that, yeah, so before that, he wasn't, all the guitars were me on the first two records. Um, but then, yeah, so he joined, and Ideal Motor is a result of him having a song and me having a song, and then us finding a way to put them together. And maybe that's why it's 8 minutes. But it's kind of like he had this whole melodic instrumental section, which is like what you'll hear is the last like 2.5 minutes of Idea Motor. And so that's why that ended up being that way, because we felt like, oh, the song's pretty epic, and it's just like, wouldn't it be really epic and cool if it was like we really made it like that and we had this huge instrumental ending kind of thing, like a Dream Theater thing or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's, and generally the lead guitar, you'll hear, a change in the lead guitars of the band once he joins. There's more solos, they're more intricate, they're more shreddy, right? So that's kind of what he brought to the band.
Yeah, and now having like two guitars, it makes pretty much would make the sound like more fuller and heavier.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so like tell me about like the cycle for this album because this is like I said my favorite album from you guys.
Uh, to be honest, to be honest, the cycle of that album was kind of chaotic. Um, there was a lot going on within the band at the time. Uh, as you saw, like with the music videos, if you said it, it's your favorite album, whatever.
Yeah,
The only music video for the whole album is Panophobia.
which is a great song, probably much my favorite song from you guys.
Yeah, it's a banger. It's super fun to play live too. It's like super headbanger kind of song. But yeah, it's the only video because we were going through a lot of turmoil and it was really hard for the band to work on stuff together. And yeah, so and then the touring cycle was kind of a mess as a result of it for some reasons. And we did really well with Lullabies. Like we made a big splash. So this was the follow-up, and it was supposed to be like, okay, you made a big splash. Now we're going to follow up and really hit the world. And it kind of didn't hit the way it was supposed to for different reasons, marketing reasons, touring reasons, the singles, like not having enough singles to market it properly and all that. But I mean, we learned a lot as a band and we started to do some new things that we hadn't done before. Like we did a headlining tour of Europe, and it was the first time we ever did that. We only supported in Europe before. So that was cool. It showed that there was some growth going on there.
Yeah, yeah. And tell me about the next album, "Eye of Providence," the first album with Vicky Sarakis on vocals. How did you get her in the band?
Basically, when it was known that we needed a new singer, we looked around locally, like we thought in our heads about people we knew personally, and there wasn't really anyone we knew of that would fit the band. So we started to look like online, essentially, for any singers that looked like they might be able to pull it off. And we found Vicky just on YouTube, just like that. And she had a lot of cover videos, and a lot of them are really good. And we said, hey, let's give her a shot. Let's try an audition. Let's see what she's got. Let's talk to her and see what we can do. And it just went from there. Everything was easy. It was like she was super nice. She would deliver tracks back to us really fast, and they'd be really well done. So we were impressed. And we had some different tests and trial periods of like feeling it out. And then once we were sure that it really felt right, then we knew this is it. We're going to go with Vicky and see how it goes. And it turned out great, like better than I honestly. I knew we were taking a huge risk, and Eye of Providence was complete, and I was like, it's even better than I expected it to be.
Yeah, yeah. Were you kind of like nervous? Because of course, when anytime when a band changes a singer, like there's always like the nervousness of like, will this work? And of course, or will not work? And of course, in you guys' case, it did work. Or how did you feel? Did you feel like nervous, of course, with the singer change?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely nervous. It was a huge swing that we did to like it's just like a huge roll of the dice, which any band that does that, and our band in particular, it's really tough because the whole like marketing of the band I knew was kind of tied to the singer, even though I know the music speaks for itself, both musically and vocally. It's like just the marketing wise, it's how the world works. Unfortunately, bands with female singers, it just becomes the entire face of the band, and you just have to accept that. And so it was very scary that like we're changing that face. How are people going to react to this? Obviously, we were all very nervous about it, but we got through it, and have now done 3 full albums and an EP,
Yeah.
and it's pretty solidified that this is the Agonist.
Yeah. And then kind of the next album, Five, pretty much the first turnaround, like it was released literally like a year I Providence. Did you start writing for Five right after their one I Providence was released?
I guess kind of. I don't. The thing is that I don't write in a scheduled way. So I write when I write, and it could be the day after I just recorded an album, or it could be 2 years later, or it could, it's everything in between. I don't have like some bands I know will be like from March to June of this year, we're writing a new record. You know what I mean? It's like it's a scheduled thing. Whereas whenever I pick up a guitar, I write something. If it's a riff, it's a whatever, I'll dictate it in my phone if I'm not, in my studio or whatever. Or if I am there, well, this is my home studio right now where I'm sitting. And it's like, if I'm here and I will jot it down, then I'll do it, or whatever. But if I'm upstairs and I'm in front of the TV and I happen to have a guitar in my hand and I'm like, that's really cool, I'll just turn on my phone dictation and, play it into that. And that's how ideas happen. And so, yeah, I don't know when all that stuff that was written, it's like it was written over the course of a couple of years, and it just, material piles up, and then you're like, okay, now let's start. Then there's a process of like structuring. Okay, we have all this material now. Now we have to go through it and cut out and take this, and okay, that part's not good. It needs a bridge. But the basis of all the material is kind of all there already.
Yeah, yeah, and I still think it's a great album. And I know you interesting. I love how you covered Hosier's "Take Me to Church." I think it's a very interesting cover. For what made you guys decide to cover that song in particular?
I was just really blown away by it when I heard it, and thought it was really cool that to hear a song that's like, top 10 radio hit song, but that I find is still uh, musically very artistic and has a lot to offer emotionally and everything. It's not just another pop song kind of thing. So I was really happy whenever I hear a song that gets to be a top song that I really respect artistically. It always makes me happy that, the public is enjoying. Everyone can really love something that, is like has a lot to offer more than just a fun pop dance beat kind of thing. But yeah, I just love that song, and we knew that we wanted to do a cover, and I felt like it should be something that's like not obvious. Like sometimes a metal band will cover like an 80s metal song,
Yeah,
or something like that, a popular 80s metal song. And it's like, yeah, I don't want to do that. I want to do something that's like totally different. And also, I'd like it to be a modern thing. I don't want to cover a classic 70s song or whatever. I want it to be something that's out now, but we're going to do it our way kind of thing.
yeah, and I think
And so I brought it up to the band and they said yes. Some of them reluctantly, to be honest. Some of them were not that into the idea, but I was into it and Vicky was into it. So we did it.
yeah, and I still think it's like it almost kind of like made it like your own in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. That was the idea.
Hey,
Yeah, it was cool. It was a cool experience.
yeah, and of course I remember that I pretty much saw you for the first time on this cycle. You played that tour with the Epica and Flush God Apocalypse. That was the first time I saw you guys. I know you played like the Masquerade in Atlanta, Georgia, and I don't know how well you can see it, but I have that like in the poster in the background right there. What
Cool.
was that tour like?
That tour was really fun. That was one of our favorite US tours ever. We love Epica. We've toured with them many times and we know them really well. So that was cool. And we met Flesh God on that tour and became really tight with them. They're super awesome guys and really funny all the
Yeah,
time, like
and
joking
nice by
all
the
the
way.
time. Yeah, super nice and ridiculously talented. And um, it was just a blast. Yeah, we had a great time on that tour.
Yeah, I still definitely still one of my favorite live shows I've seen. But kind of moving on to the next album, Orphans, I honestly think that this is my opinion is probably like you guys' best album to date. Like, what was that like going from 5 to this? I feel like it's a lot more darker and has like a lot heavier.
Yeah, it was like a direct response to five. Like five was by far the least dark, least extreme heavy album, and it explored a lot of melodic stuff, a lot of ballads, a lot of rock melody kind of stuff. And we produced it with a non-metal producer who usually does rock and pop albums. So after that, we were all itching to get back to the darkness. And so everything that was coming out was really dark and really aggressive. And it was a lot of fun, and it felt right. It felt like the right thing. We felt like we were back home in a way, and we went and recorded it with Chris again, Chris Donaldson, and everything felt like, you know, this is home. This is what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I find Vicky really came into her own. That's really, obviously she's great from before, but something shifted, I think, at that point. And it was like she reached her final form kind of thing, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah,
And from
totally.
then on it was a different level
Yeah.
after that.
I remember hearing like in Vertigo, like especially like at the end where he does like those like really low bellows, it's just fucking sick. And I think like her range has really expanded massively in the growling
Yeah,
department. And then the clean side, it just has more control and sustain than ever before.
yeah, that's it. So I think she just we got her in the band because there was when we first got her. I mean, from the time she first joined till now, it's a huge evolution in her singing ability and her performing ability. And we saw I saw in her, I know, the potential when we first got her. Like the potential was so big because she already did what is truly like the hardest stuff really well, which is purely singing really well from, you know, her diaphragm and chest voice, and being able to really do that really well with a good tone that is nice to listen to. And that's the hardest thing, really, like learning to growl in different ways, and or learning to do maybe little operatic vocals better and whatnot, that are like backing vocal type choir stuff. Those things, I think, I'm no singer, but I think they are a lot easier to learn with practice. But she had like the gift of like that lead singer belting voice that she could pull out, which it's really hard to teach that by practicing. Like it kind of really helps if you have something already there.
Yeah, and of course I know you toured for a little bit, and then of course the pandemic hit because I remember when I was actually supposed to see you with the Agonist and no with the Agonist of Flesh God. You were supposed to do a tour in 2020 with this with an orchestra, but of course COVID came and fucked it up. How excited would have that been?
Yeah, we were super excited for that tour. Plus, you know, it was going to be like just us and them too, which is
Yeah.
cool. You know, because usually if it's like, oh, there's four bands, and now that's like, oh, you're going to play at 6:30 in the evening or something. You know, so it was nice that we had a really good slot. You know, and we were going to be with them, so we knew we were going to have a great time, and they were going to be awesome. Uh, but you know, things happen. They never rescheduled that idea.
Yeah.
You know, I think it was a big risk for them. I think they probably lost a lot of money on it, even though it didn't happen, right? Because it literally canceled like right before, like a few days before. It was still technically scheduled to happen right up until a couple days before.
Yeah.
So that means they printed all kinds of merchandise for that. That means they probably booked flights for that. all kinds of expense, rented stuff. So I think the fact that they lost a lot on that probably hindered them from doing it again, that same idea, because it's a big production idea to pull off.
Yeah. Yeah, would have been cool. Maybe it'll happen again one day. Who knows?
Yeah.
So, kind of like during in the pandemic, you did like your latest EP days before the world wept. But how did this EP come to be?
It was just we, like so many other bands, I think, knew that we shouldn't just sit around and do nothing. We might as well record music, you know? I knew I had stuff lying, like I knew I had the same way, like I mentioned before, I just write stuff when I write it, when I pick up a guitar. So by the time we even decided that yes, let's go and record something, let's write and record something, I already had a bunch of ideas jotted down, so part of the work was already done. And now it's just, a matter of continuing to add to it.
Yeah.
So it was, yeah, and it was interesting being everyone's, locked away. And I recorded all my guitars here in this room at home. So I had no producer. I've never done that before. Every other time I've always had the guy there with me, and he's like telling me go again, take it again, or that was good, or fix this part. And so I was just by myself, but I knew what needed to be done. I knew what Chris expected, which is a very high expectation. So I really tried my best to deliver him the tracks, as he wanted it, as tight as he wanted it. And I was happy because he didn't come back to me. He didn't say any, he said, no, it's good. So
Yeah.
it was a cool experience to self record, but like for an album level recording, because I only record at home just for demoing ideas, not for something to be released as an album.
Yeah, and I feel like you also kind of showcase this kind of little EP also kind of showcases a lot more of a technical kind of side of the Agonist.
Yeah, it's kind of, I feel like it returns a bit to like the lullabies era of music side, but we're more mature now, I think, in the way that we look at music and songwriting and as a whole. So it's like that intensity and technicality, but with someone a bit more controlled driving the wheel so that it stays on the rails, even though it's going really fast.
Yeah. Yeah, and tell me about like the first tours back on this, because I remember the last time I saw you actually was in Baltimore, Maryland. You did that tour, little off show with Kark Angren. I was actually at Maryland Death Fest, but I actually left early to go see that. Tell me about like that little tour.
Yeah, that tour was great. I mean, that was just the off date at the end there, but yeah, there was a tour with Hypocrisy and Karak Angren, and it was great. It was to get back out there. It felt weird a bit at first, but like after a day or two, it was like, right, yeah, right back at it, back to normal. But it was great to get back and play again for the US. It had been a long time since we played in the US. Like even like long, because besides COVID, we had already like had a decent break from playing the US prior to that. So it just so happened to line up that way because we were planning to go the day COVID started, the day lockdown started
Oh,
was
damn.
pretty much our first show. Um, but yeah, so it was a lot of fun to get back out there.
And and since it's been a couple years now, like, of course, this came out like the end of 2021. Have you all started like work for the next full length Agonist album? But what's the process with that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we officially started, but again, me and Simon have a bunch of ideas that we've recorded over the past like 2 years, you know? So there's a lot of good ideas um, there to take from to start building on. And I mean, technically, what me and Simon have already, you could like, here's an entire record, like here's like 10 songs, but they're not good enough they're not happy enough to be like they're good enough at this point. They're more of like a scratch track, brainstorming. They're put together with like sections and everything, but we're still going to work it out, I think. But the plan is to get into that pretty much very soon, like to get serious about it in the next few months.
All right, that's awesome. So, kind of in the end, to kind of wrap things out up, what's next for the Agonist? Is there like any tours that you're allowed to announce to like sort of like close this whole interview out?
Well, some that we're allowed to, yeah, because it's kind of already is that. In the summer, we're going to go back to Europe for festivals. So we have some already booked, like Brutal Assaults and Gefle Metal Fest in Sweden, and a Metal Days, I think, is another one, and a couple others. So we're going to be doing those. And our agent is currently kind of filling in some dates at that time so that we can play in some other cities while we're over there. So that's, I can talk about freely that yes, that's happening this summer. So you just look up our tour dates and you'll find them there. Other than that, we are working on something else for the fall, which is still being worked on, so it's not announced yet.
All right. All right, just so before we go, just want to thank you for this conversation, Danny. There's just any final words you want to say to anybody that's watching this?
Just thanks a lot to everyone. If anyone listened to this from, we went through, I guess, briefly all the albums, and if you've been listening since the beginning, I just want to thank you very much because sometimes you forget because you get lost in your own thing about whatever that you forget that like, wow, if I've written and recorded like 70 songs or something, or something like that. I don't know the exact number. It's around that. And there's people around the world. Some of them have heard all of them. Like, they like it that much. What you did, it gives them that much enjoyment that they've wanted to hear everything that you did. And so it's important for me and everyone else in my band and other bands not to forget that because it means a lot to us.
Awesome. So everybody, Danny from the Agonist, we'll see you next time.